Hi and welcome to Menstrual Cups and Cloth Pads Kenya. So today's video is going to be about what things to consider when you're buying reusable menstrual products internationally. You may ask, why do you want to buy them internationally? Why not just buy them locally? And I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. For one, you may just not have the products available locally. So a couple of years ago, you could only buy one brand of menstrual cups locally. Now you can find a few. Some of them are good cups, internationally recognized, good quality. Some of them have questionable origin and quality, I would say. And then in terms of, say, cloth pads, for example, you will find that they tend to be geared towards functionality and affordability more so than aesthetics. So you may just decide that I want to have a larger variety to choose from, and that may be one of the reasons that you purchase from. Second reason may be that you have bought locally, you have a good variety of makers in your country and you've bought them all and you want to just try something new. It may be that the things that you bought aren't working for you, or maybe that they are working, but you have an acquisition mentality, aka you're greedy, and you just want to try new things, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you may have a bunch of reasons why you want to decide to try, and that just comes down to personal choice. The first thing to consider is conversion rate. Now, depending on what currency you're purchasing in, you may be getting more or less value for money. For example, if you're purchasing USA to Canada, then you're going to be getting more value for your money than if you're purchasing, for example, USA to the UK. For someone like me, who comes from a country with a weaker currency, it's always going to work against me. So it's just something I need to factor in my budget, that I'm going to probably get less pads than I would necessarily want to get. And that's fine. I have a budget. I think most of the world has a budget. If you have a limited amount of money, then this doesn't apply to you, but I think the rest of us, it does. It also comes into play depending on which country you're purchasing from. So for example, for me, the UK currency is much stronger, so it is more expensive to purchase pads from the UK than it is to purchase from, say, a country in the EU or the US, which I think is definitely the best conversion rate so far. So that also determines where I'm more likely to want to spend my money, because for the same amount of money, I might be able to buy more pads in one country than I can in another. The next thing to consider is shipping costs. And shipping costs can actually be a deterrent against buying from certain countries or even certain makers, because while you may find that there is a theme across one country, you may find slight variations within even amongst the makers that would mean that you're paying more for shipping with one person than you are with another. So that is something to consider. When you are shipping, I understand, like now in the US Postal Service has increased the rates for international shipping. So it has gone from whatever it was to, say, $18 to ship. So you may find that when you're shipping, the cost of shipping is worth more than the value of the pad, sometimes double. And so you have to decide whether the pad is really, or the cup or whatever it is really worth it to you. If you're going to say, like, I'm paying $9 for a pad and then I'm paying $18 for shipping, how much do I really want that? Another thing to consider that goes hand in hand with shipping is tracking, because within the country you find that it seems to happen especially a lot with the US, where you can track it. If you purchase on PayPal or Etsy, you can track the package for seemingly no additional cost. I don't know if there's an additional cost, but it seems like to me there isn't. Not so much in the UK, actually. I don't know why. But then if you were then paying international tracking, that can really ramp up the cost of the shipping. So for example, I purchased a pad from an Aussie maker and that was going to the UK, and it was like £4 to ship to the UK, which I thought was extraordinarily affordable. And then if I needed tracking, it was like an extra, I can't remember, like £25, so in that case, I opted not to have the tracking because it was worth more than what I was purchasing. And I thought, if it gets lost, then it gets lost. I'm just going to have to take that as a risk of international shipping. Now, some makers will not sell you something and send it internationally without you paying for that extra tracking, because they just don't want to be held liable if something happens. So you need to do your research when you're purchasing and see who does international, because some people just don't even ship internationally, especially like with the rates change in the US. I've seen some makers saying, I'm just not going to do it anymore, it's just not worth it. So you need to research and find out who does ship, how much the shipping costs, do they require you to track, and how much it's going to be. And you can even find variances within countries. Like I found UK shipping tends to be quite affordable within the UK, but one or two sellers sells the stuff. Their shipping costs are much more expensive. Now I know like certain countries it's just more expensive to, like Ireland, for some reason it's quite expensive. I don't know if it's the whole of Ireland or if it's like one part of it, but it just seems to be more expensive. I used to think Canada was quite expensive as well to ship from, but I purchased recently from a Canadian maker and it was Canada to US and it was fine. It was very affordable. So I don't know. Yeah, so definitely something to consider when you are factoring in your shipping costs. The third thing to consider would be customs. Now, depending on the country that you're in and the value of the package that you're receiving, you may be liable to customs fees. So, for example, if you ship to the UK, anything over £15, is it, or something like that, attracts customs. Now, they're not going to check every package. So, unless it's been indicated on the package very clearly and in a pronounced manner, you may get away with not paying customs. So you can take that chance, but it's probably better to budget it in just in case you do get your package does get pulled out and then they say, look, this is worth X, Y, Z. Now you can try and do a workaround and maybe ask the maker if they would ship it as a gift, because then I think you can get around that. But not everyone's going to agree with it, and it depends really on what your relationship is with the maker. If you're a brand new person, I don't know, you can try. That's all I'm saying. Still on the topic of customs, it's important to check whether the country you live in has any regulations that prevent you from receiving products from certain makers. For example, in the US, the FDA, you have to be FDA approved to send products to the US. So if you purchase from a maker who isn't, whether it's cups or menstrual pads, you may find that your product, actually, I'm not really sure what happens. Do they seize them? Probably. I'd imagine that they would, because it's not regulated. So you need to double check what your regulations are in your individual company and see whether they're country and see whether there are restrictions. And still on the topic, not so much customs related, but reliability of your postal service. Now, as somebody who lives in a country where the postal service is hit or miss, this has been a big factor in how I have been able to purchase, and even whether I have been able to purchase pads internationally. I mean, I get Christmas cards in June that were sent in November the previous year. So things are slow. And sometimes they just never make it. And of course, this happens in every country. Things will get lost and stuff like that. But I think the probability is higher here that it may not make it or not. So you need to determine whether or not it's safe or whether it is reliable enough to use. Because if you're purchasing pads with knowing there's a high possibility they're not going to turn up, and then you're then trying to make a claim afterwards saying, hey, I didn't get this, it's not fair to the maker. Another thing to consider is time difference. Depending on what time zone you're in, you may find that you would have to set your alarm for 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning, whatever, to purchase something from a maker who's in a different time zone. I know the US people probably have the same exact problem just because they've got so many there, but especially if you're buying from another country, purchasing in the US, like UK, US, or even purchasing maybe in Australia, you'll find that the time zone just doesn't work for you. Another way it doesn't work is because if you have a maker who does flash orders where they say, I'm stocking in 10 minutes, first to comment gets it, that will almost 100% guarantee that you will never get one of their pads. I mean, there's makers who I've been trying to get pads from for months, and just because they do these flash orders and they do these small orders and they do these last minute orders, the time difference just does not work in my favor. So definitely something to consider. It may also deter you from purchasing from certain people. It may not, but something to consider. Another important thing to consider is what platform the seller uses to to sell their products from. Now, you will find that some people have websites, their own websites. Some will sell on Facebook groups, and some will use like a selling platform like Etsy or Hyena Cart, Big Cartel, whatever they are. Now, if you are purchasing internationally, you may find that there are restrictions either put on by your bank or put on by the website or the selling platform as to how you can use your card. So you may find that you're not able to use your card at all directly. Some you are, some you aren't. Etsy is great. You can use your card. I have no problems with it, and it's actually my favorite platform to purchase from. If you can't use your card, there's always third party, I don't know what you would call it in this payment platforms, like PayPal. It's the one I can think of off the top of my head, but there's loads. But PayPal is a good one. It's recognized everywhere. The trouble is there can be restrictions on your PayPal if you as an international person. So PayPal Kenya has lots of restrictions. Like you cannot send money to friends and family. You can only do it as like sale of goods, which is fine. It's good for your buyer protection. But if you're actually sending money to a friend, then that's definitely not something that you want. You cannot. It doesn't allow you to. It automatically changes the shipping address to Kenya, the country of shipping to Kenya, despite the fact that the rest of the address is in whatever country. So it limits you as to where you can purchase from, because you have to message the seller and say, hey, are you comfortable changing this to XYZ country? And some are not, because I think it also affects the insurance. So you may find that you're just not able to purchase from certain sellers because of that. And then you may just find that your whatever payment platform you choose does not work regardless. Like Big Cartel, I cannot use my card, I cannot use my PayPal. I just get error messages all the time. So there are some limitations to what you can buy, and depends on the different countries, and depends on the platform that you're using and the card that you're using. So check with your bank if you need to, check with your PayPal, communicate with them and see what their restrictions are before you decide to commit to purchasing something. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with the previous point was the seller's preferred stocking method. And here I'm talking about cloth pads. So for example, you'll have sellers who will do ready to ship items. You'll have sellers who will do group orders where you have one fabric and you can choose from a variety of shapes. You'll have full customs where you can choose from any fabric and any shape that the seller does. And semi-customs, which is, I think they limit either the shapes or the fabrics or both, but you still get quite a wide variety. Now, depending on where you are internationally, I mentioned earlier about flash orders. I think flash orders for me are at the bottom of the list when I'm thinking about which sellers I want to purchase from, because time differences just mean that there are some sellers whose flash orders I will never make. I will be fast asleep when the flash order is happening, which means basically they will be like, we're selling now, or I'm selling in 10 minutes, first 4 people to comment, sometimes just like first 1 person to comment or whatever. So it's really difficult to get a stocking from, to make a purchase from anybody who just does, or predominantly does, flash orders. I think customs are quite nice because there's a list and there's a list. And when your time comes round on the list, you get to purchase something and you buy something that you really want. So I think customs are probably one of my favorite ways to shop. I also like to shop from sellers who have a lot of ready to ship items. So whether it's on a website or it's on a selling platform or whatever, they have a lot of them. You can go on. I mean, the thing with ready to ship is that you get what you get. But it doesn't matter. Often there's popular shapes and popular fabrics and popular, fabric types as well. So you still get a good variety, and it means you don't have to wait as well. You can just buy it as and when you want. Group orders are fine. Usually if the seller gives enough notice, then you can plan your day around them. If they happen to fall in the middle of the day and you're in a meeting, it's tough luck. But in general, those are also okay. So those are all things to consider when you're buying from a seller, because different sellers do have preferences to the types of stockings that they have. And that might be an influencing factor in determining which seller you're going to buy from long term. Another super important thing that will determine or that will affect your international buying ability is holds. Whether a seller agrees to hold your pads for more than one purchase or not. Now, the reason why this is such a great thing is if a seller does hold it, you can purchase, and they only do, say, group orders where you're only allowed to order one pad at a time. You can purchase from this group order and the next one and the next one and the next one until you get a big enough stockpile so that the shipping does feel worth it. Now, if you find somebody who doesn't do holds and they only do group orders, for example, you buy one pad, you ship it, you're paying however many, whether it's $10, $18, whatever it is. You buy another pad, you're paying again the same $10, when you could, if they were holding, you could buy 4 or 5 pads for the same amount of shipping. So I know people who will not buy from certain sellers because they don't do holds, and it's nothing against the seller. It's just not cost effective, and it's just not financially viable. I tend personally to find that I buy more volume, more pads, more anything from a seller who's willing to do a hold, even if it's just a short hold, even if they say I'm going to do it for 2 or 3 purchases or over a period of 4 weeks or whatever it is. You tend to find that you're going to buy more because you want to make the shipping worth it as well. So holds are just really important. Hand in hand with this is turnaround time. Some sellers are much faster than others. It just is what it is. And you'll find that they will make your pad in matters of days. Now, usually they'll give themselves, they will kind of manage your expectations, and they say turnaround time is 1 to 4 weeks or whatever it is. But those makers who are going to have a quick turnaround time, despite having said that. And when they don't, they actually will make a post and say, I'm really sorry this happened. I've been really slow making the pads and whatever it is. And usually it's like a couple of days. You're like, you didn't even need to apologize. There are then sellers who do take a considerable amount of time. And it could be for a variety of reasons. It's not a bad thing necessarily. They could have day jobs, or they could have medical conditions that prevent them from working on the pads full time, or whatever it is, So those are things to consider, especially if you're shipping on a deadline. If you're using, for example, freighting to ship. So you send to a freighting company and then they ship it all at once, and you've only got XYZ amount of time within which to get your purchases together. A long turnaround time might not work for you. Vice versa, if you need something to be held and they don't want to hold it and they have a quick turnaround time, that might not work for you as well. So definitely 2 important things to consider is holds and turnaround time. Another thing to consider is what happens when something goes wrong. If, for example, you receive the wrong item, which happens on very rare occasions, but it does happen, or you receive something where you're contesting the quality of the workmanship, how would you go about getting a replacement product, or how would you go about getting a refund? Because, for example, if a maker has a policy of refund or replace on receipt of the faulty item or the wrong item, it may not be viable for you to send it back to them. And even if they're sending you a replacement without you having to send it back, are you going to be able to get it? If you've had to make convoluted arrangements to get your products in the first place, and you get the wrong thing, for example, and they say, I'm really sorry, I'll send you out something new. And how are you going to get it? So these are all things to consider as well. Now, I can't really talk much on it because very fortunately, I haven't had this experience, but it is something that I have worried about because I don't really know what I would do in a situation like that, which required me to return it. I think I would just message the seller and explain the circumstances around the purchase and say, look, it's just not something that I can do. It's not viable for you or for me to do it. And I don't know, and hope that it can be resolved amicably, but something to consider. I think the last thing that I would say is worth considering, especially as you can see, it's just got darker and darker in here, is whether or not certain fabrics are available in certain countries. For example, WindPro is used quite widely within among US makers, not so much among the UK and the Australian makers. And I spoke to a UK maker and they explained that they have to import it and it's quite expensive and it increases the cost of the pad. So there are some makers who will opt not to have it and have something else instead, like an anti-pill or a polar fleece, which, some people may prefer not to have. You'll also find that there will be makers who will, like say in the UK, who will provide a WindPro but only on certain absorbencies or with an upcharge if you opt for that instead of another. Another one I've noticed is super heavy organic bamboo fleece as a core. I spoke to another maker in the UK and they also said that it is not necessarily easy to get, and so they would use normally Zorb, which I've heard people have had allergies to, for example, and may opt not to purchase from a maker who does use Zorb as their core. So all in all, I didn't make this video to deter anybody from purchasing internationally. It's nice to see what variety is out there if you can afford it, and if you are able to get it, just physically able to get it, then it is nice, and it's a nice alternative to some of the things that you can find locally. These are just some of the things to consider when you're starting out buying, and you'll find your groove and you'll find what works for you and you'll find which makers work. And and you may even decide that actually I'm fine just purchasing what I can locally and I don't need to go out there and to search for more variety. So I think I've covered everything. If there's something that I've missed, or if there's something that you have experienced personally purchasing internationally, please leave a comment down below. I'd be really interested to hear what other things people have to overcome when they're purchasing internationally, because it's something that I do. I do all the time, and it's something that I'm quite interested in. Thank you for watching.